And we have 3 minutes. We are 3 minutes late. Sorry for that. So I think it was a very enriching morning. I'm sure the afternoon will be as enriching as this morning. So thank you for being there again, and not for going out in Paris to sightseeing or whatsoever, or to go back to work. And I'm very happy to ask for the floor to Scott Mogull, that knows a lot of the speakers that were here this morning because they studied together about the same time, Texas University. And please take the floor, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm Scott Mogull from Texas State University. I'm an associate professor of technical communication. What I am going to talk to you today about is not from an academic standpoint, but it actually has to do with some of the time that I spent in industry. So for about 10 years, I was in the biotech industry as a technical writer, as a product manager, as a marketing manager, and that's the story that I'm going to have today. In this presentation, I'm going to describe a case study that bridges technical communication and marketing departments within a biotech organization, as illustrated through a hybrid genre that I call the application guide. This application guide is the convergence of technical communication genres and marketing genres. Through description of this personal experience and our analysis, I'm going to examine how technical writers might be able to break down the traditional silos and more closely align their work with other departments in an organization, specifically the marketing department. Furthermore, and probably more importantly, I want to describe that and show how genre change is a disruptive force within an organization that can have both positive and negative implications, both internally and externally. So the primary outcome of this presentation is for technical writers to consider revising their product documentation strategically within the technical communication silo to align their products, our products, which are genres, more closely with the business objectives of a larger organization. Today, you're going to have the opportunity to learn from my mistakes rather than my success. So let's examine this hybrid genre that I call an application guide. As a product manager for a specific product line, I conceive the application guide as a way to combine marketing content that was traditionally provided in product brochures and newsletters with instruction materials or instruction manuals. Specifically, the microRNA application guide consisted of informative and promotional brochure material from marketing, which I wrote, 17 instruction manuals, which was written by technical writers, and 3 technical newsletter articles from scientific writers. This became a spiral-bound book of approximately 200 pages. This hybrid genre combined the brochures, manuals, and newsletter articles around a more general problem than what we traditionally cover or we traditionally write about in technical writing. In this case, the technology was for a group of related biotechnology products that were for the investigation of a newly identified biological material called microRNA. The target audience was scientific researchers in universities and industry settings with the intended purpose that I had of explaining and promoting how to conduct laboratory research on microRNA from the big picture down to the individual steps. Because the field was new, most of the potential customers did not understand what this technology was and much less how to conduct research on it. So the goals of my document were threefold: informative, persuasive, and instructive. As suggested by the title, the application guide, it described how to use the technology. Rhetorically, I selected this title for a variety of reasons. First, I wanted sort of an alluring title that people within the industry would not immediately identify what it was and either set it aside or discard it. So it had to be something that appealed to their needs, which was how to use the technology, but also had to be a little bit vague and pique their curiosity. I wanted to allude to the instructions in the guide, but I needed a description that was sufficiently broad in order to encompass the marketing materials covered within the product line. And more importantly, the information within this document all had to fit within the application, but you notice that there was at two different levels. So first was the instructions. We had 17 instruction manuals. And then at the broader level, the application standpoint was I wanted to show how these technologies within the product line all fit together and could be used for the research. So to give an analogy for this, you might consider a set of instructions for, let's say, a frying pan, you know, how you might cook your breakfast in the morning. You have a simple set of instructions for one product, whereas the application guide will give you a set of instructions for creating a dinner. So it was creating more of a solution on the bigger picture of what you would actually want to get done. And from a marketing perspective, what this would do is this would lead to the purchase of additional products. Because if we consider when instructions are traditionally read by users, this is after they've already made a purchase. So they've already bought the item, and for the most part, it just tells you how to use the item. From a business perspective, most businesses are looking to increase the amount of profit to sell products upstream and downstream, and so this was a way to combine a genre that we had with some of the sales goals that the organization would have. So in creating the guide, I not only wanted to get the marketing material in front of potential customers, but I also wanted to leverage, let's say, an increased or higher level of credibility that the instructions would have over basic promotional material. The marketing material often is discarded, whereas the instructional material, at least in this case, would be something that they would actually need for any of the 17 products. So that describes what the application guide is. More importantly, let's examine how it was implemented internally and distributed to customers. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I would have liked to have said that the application guide was a complete success. But if that was the case, I probably wouldn't have much to talk about today. As a novel genre within an organization, the application guide was neither easy to implement nor a resounding success as a document. The actual process I found to be very convoluted with some unanticipated objections from different agents or individuals within an organization. Furthermore, the implementation of the new genre became a compromise of agents throughout the organization. In hindsight, I want to get this, you know, I guess as sort of somewhat cathartic. I should say that I have learned from this experience. I do want to say that looking back 15 years ago, I certainly should have initiated greater dialogue with the different agents or individuals within the organization and probably predicted several of the objections to the guide. However, from my marketing perspective at the time, I was more focused on the potential effects that this genre would have on customers and the market rather than focused internally on those involved in the process. And I would say that's probably the critical error that was made. So let's examine the opposition to the application guide, and in doing so, provide some insights into breaking down silos through genres. First, I want to talk about the technical writing team. So I, as the product manager, was working in a large marketing department, and the technical writing team was a subgroup of that department. They had about 3 individuals and a manager. The technical writing manager appeared to struggle with the understanding of the idea of an application guide. She didn't initially understand the scope of the project, the rationale for the guide, and seemed to be very worried about what sounded like too many instruction manuals to produce at one time. And I want to address that issue and that point and then set it aside. So I did say that there were 17 instruction manuals that were included in the application guide, and that sounds like a lot of documentation. But I also want to point out that at the time, most of the products already existed, and therefore the instructions were already written, and the information was available in the content management system, so it was just ready for download. Furthermore, we had already specified when the new products were going to be launched, and so those instructions or those products required documentation, so it really was not any additional writing that needed to be done to produce this document. So I asked myself, what was her struggle with this concept or with this application guide? And I believe that the focus or her focus on the 17 instruction manuals was more of a tangible point that she could point to that focused on her apprehension about what the application guide represented. For the technical writing team, the application guide represented a loss of agency from outside of their silo. For decades, so if we look at what the technical writing team has done, it's produced a set of instructions based on when a product was going to be launched from the product manager, and the product manager would merely specify the date that the product would be launched. The technical writers would produce the documentation, oftentimes gathering most of the information from research and development, and then have all of the documentation ready to go. This had a very well-defined product. It was within a given structure of workload, and you had the same sort of limitations and challenges that you would have as a technical writer with the existing documentation. However, when you introduce a new genre, those predictable norms are no longer the case. Furthermore, what I think is interesting is not only was the technical writing team relatively isolated and operating independently from the rest of the marketing department, but the technical writing manager worked remotely and was about 2,000 miles away from our corporate headquarters. And this, I believe, likely contributed to her initial reaction of confusion and opposition, probably focusing on a loss of diminished agency. So I want to note for our discussion of silos that the technical writing manager preferred the norm. When it came to agency, she seemed to prefer being independent and apart from the rest of the marketing department. And that might be beneficial for some individuals, but it may not work well for an entire organization. So when we talk about breaking down silos, we also have to talk about breaking down our norms and our perceived silos that we might inherently carry with us. These particular issues that I had with, or the concerns that we had with the technical writing manager were worked through partly through the leadership structure within the marketing department. So the technical writers were a subgroup of marketing, and we did get the application guide produced. But that was not the extent of the obstacles that an organization will have with producing a new genre. Another group that objected to the application guide was manufacturing. And at this time, the objection from manufacturing to me was unexpected. But in hindsight, I think that was a rather naive oversight on my part as the product manager. And the objection that manufacturing had was actually at two levels. This tended to be more pragmatic and procedural rather than conceptual in the loss of agency. The main objections that the manufacturing team had to the application guide was that, number one, it costs more to produce than a traditional instruction manual. And secondly, it was larger, so that space and storage and shipping were more difficult. In this case, I had to negotiate the solution with the manufacturing department. In the negotiations, I originally proposed that, okay, the marketing team would pay for the application guide. But this would create some other issues where we actually would have to have a couple of different catalog numbers because we no longer wanted to provide an application guide to everybody that ordered the product if they were repeat customers or if they ordered multiple items of the same that were covered within the same application guide. So this created a confounding problem for customer service, which would then have to manage multiple catalog numbers, one for the product with the application guide, some with the product without the application guide, for the whole series of products. Then we could also imagine that if this implementation took place, technical services would also have a problem, and possibly other product managers within the organization. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that the implication of breaking down silos through genre change is a disruptive process. It can be done, but it has a ripple effect throughout an organization, and many departments and individuals are touched beyond what you might originally imagine. In terms of this story, what we actually ended up doing was we actually decided that the argument for the profit or how much cost it would make or take to produce the application guide was the primary argument against implementing it from a manufacturing perspective. That would reduce the margin on products, and that was something that throughout the business we didn't want to affect. It was implemented as a marketing document, and it was something that we advertised to customers that they could get for some of their contact information. Thus, the new genre had some impact externally on the market, but not as much as planned. What's interesting is how much impact it had internally within an organization. So, in conclusion, the main point of this presentation is that genre change is a disruptive force throughout an organization for multiple groups and individuals that have become accustomed to a particular norm. Such change, I have found, is more than a genre product itself. It threatens the agency, process, and even profit of an organization. Therefore, for an effective change, meaning hopefully one in a more communicative role than I was, must address these issues in these areas. And I do believe that a successful change is possible through genre change. But in doing so, you have to consider all of the agents and all of the individuals in an organization and really look at the process, the product, the profit internally. Thank you.